Good evening. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. You know, it's a real pleasure to be here today, Apollopalooza. You know, it's interesting. I love this museum. It has those airplanes of my generation. I flew the Hyundai, got over there, got 86 over there, and the predecessor of the T-Bird. But this is representative of an era that also was representative of many of the people who became my controllers. Now, one thing I'm very happy about today, you know, as a flight director, the first thing I asked when I walked into Mission Control are the roses here. Here are my roses. We had an unknown space admirer who would send a bouquet of red roses. They would arrive on launch day. And if you want to talk about being superstitious, you walk into that room and they're not here. They haven't been delivered yet. So you make all the calls to get it. But this is really great. I really enjoy being here. So at the Apollo 11 landing, I'm going to have to put on some glasses here, is ranked among the 10 most world-changing events of the 20th century. Looking back 50 years, it came about from a unique confluence of events: a Cold War, political necessity, presidential commitment, scientific and technological ability, economic prosperity, and public mood. Apollo was a watershed period in American history, and this year we're celebrating this great event. You know, when Kennedy made his speech, a Russian satellite, Sputnik, had been orbiting over our nation for 4 years before he made the speech on May 25th, 1961. 1 year prior to the speech, the Russians had put Yuri Gagarin in orbit. By our estimates, the Soviet Union was at least 2.5 years ahead of us. When President Kennedy issued this challenge, he stated, "Now is the time to take longer strides, time for a great new American enterprise." We listened to this speech of his when he said to achieve a goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely. We were challenged not to catch the Russians, but to beat the Russians and capture the high terrain of space. Kennedy's speech marked a beginning of a bold new era for humanity. For those of us working in the space program, his words, "Not because it is easy, we had a very difficult and a personal memory." 1 month prior to speech, we had blown up our second Atlas rocket. We had been trying desperately to get a spacecraft in orbit. 3 weeks earlier, we launched Alan Shepard, and we had a total of 15 minutes flight experience. He had been to 107 miles. We had not achieved orbit, and we were challenged to go to the moon. Kennedy's speech ignited the fire. In Project Mercury, John Glenn and 3 other astronauts, American astronauts, were sent to orbit and returned safely. In 1965 and 1966, Project Gemini provided the testing ground for computers and the new space technologies. We developed the skis to rendezvous 2 spacecraft, dock them, and work outside in the environment of spacecraft. We now set, by 1966, many international space records. And now we were challenged and reaching for the higher ground, the moon. We completed Gemini in November 1966. We were transitioning to Apollo with less than a year to the first launch. And on that month, we reached too far and we were going too fast. We were in mission control for a pre-launch test in December. The mission then slipped to 1967. During a pad test on Friday afternoon, January 27, 1967, fire exploded in the spacecraft. And we listened to the crew's frantic call of fire, 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 and then it was silent. Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee had died on the launch pad. We carried the memory of that afternoon forward for every day of the following years. During every launch pad test and through every mission, The words tough and competent reminded us of the sacrifice of our crewmen. But we got back into space. November, Apollo 4, the mighty Saturn V took wings. It got NASA back into the spaceflight business. In January 1968, Apollo 5, I was flight director for that mission. Unmanned test of the LEM in January demonstrated Grumman builds tough airframes, just like they build Navy fighters. Completing this mission with this lunar module, our final ground commands, we flew it from the ground for actually 3 revolutions. And our final ground commands ignited the engine and set this spacecraft spinning. The fuel depletion, diving at a high speed for re-entry over the Atlantic. But that was a confidence builder. We knew that we had a tough spacecraft. In March 1969, a crewed flight test of the Apollo 9 spacecraft cleared the lunar module for its first journey to the moon. And the lunar module is a 2-man, 2-stage spacecraft. It is designed for a single purpose, and I got to back up one here. There we go. Designed for a single purpose, to take Americans to the moon and then bring them back safely to lunar orbit. The descent stage contains a throttleable engine, 1,000 to 10,000 pound thrust, contains fuel tankage, landing gear structure, and the stowage for the surface experiments. The descent stage serves as the launch platform for the lunar ascent. The ascent stage contains a fixed thrust 3,500 pound engine, the fuel tankage, computer, displays, contains everything you need to stay alive in that space and rendezvous with another crew in orbit. We make a lot about computers today, and the Apollo spacecraft computer was the first integrated circuit technology, first machine ever built with integrated circuit technology. And the fixed memory was a core rope containing 36,000 words that provided the operating program for the landmarks we used during the landing. The erasable component of that computer was 2,048 words, random core memory. It basically provided the calculations and the logic for the registers. The display and keyboard that you have there contained a numeral pad and several special buttons. And if you take a look at today's iPhones, you'll find out there's much of a similarity between the iPhones and these guys that we were working with in the Apollo program. In mission control, we had 4 rows of consoles. We had what we call the trench, the front row, and this basically contained my trajectory team, retrofire officer, flight dynamics officer, and guidance officer. The second row had the flight surgeon on the left, the Capcom directly in front of my console, and the CSM and LEM spacecraft engineers, 2 for each spacecraft. The third row that I was in the center, had my instrumentation communications guy, had my procedures guy, my flight planner, a network controller, and then myself. The fourth row sitting behind me had the public affairs, flight operations director, headquarters, and the Department of Defense manager, and I'll talk about the DoD manager in a bit. Flight directors have, I think, a unique responsibility, not only within the space program, to a great extent today. They have the responsibility for taking any actions necessary for crew safety and mission success. During the course of a mission, they are the absolute authority. And my flight directors were in their mid-30s. I was the oldest at 36. 3 of my flight directors were former fighter pilots, and the flight directors would be assigned to specific mission phases. One would be responsible for launch, another one for EVA. I had the descent, another one had the ascent responsibility. And we would train and do all the planning for those phases. My landing team basically contained about 21 people, and we had flown with them together. We'd flown together in both the Gemini and the early Apollo missions. The average age of my controllers there was between 27 and 28 degrees. Most had engineering degrees, but some were self-taught engineers. Our support staff rooms, behind every controller had mission control. There was a support staff room where we had another depth, because in mission control we had the responsibilities for the seconds to minutes decisions. If we had time, we worked at a support staff room. And basically we had worked them on a time available basis to get any support or answers to any problems we had. The Covery recovery control room was basically a mini control center. And this was really an exciting place to go because the entire world where the Navy was operating, both ships at sea, aircraft, search and rescue airplanes around the entire world was being controlled from this room in case we had a launch abort, premature mission termination, or normal end of mission termination. But this is where we went to go. And I spent a lot of time in this room because we had to be very conscious of the weather and the various launch areas right on down the line. Probably the most important of these side rooms was my training team. They were basically a composite of the same type of controllers I had in my main control room. And they're dedicated to exploit differences in my team, exploit personnel issues, find holes in the planning, etc. By the time we were finished, we were ready, because I really worked this over. Every product that was used in the process of a mission, conduct of a mission, was developed by the controllers. Our contractors did not provide one thing that went on board the spacecraft. This was a battle, because they were used to delivering spacecraft or aircraft with operating procedures and everything you need to do the job. But basically, my primary training process was to develop everything we needed. We'd send the controllers out to the factory to get together with North America and Rockwell, and they'd come back with a bundle of assembly drawings. They would then build it, what we call integrated schematics. We went to Draper Labs, bring in the program listings, etc. So basically, with this background now, we could develop the normal and the emergency procedures. This then allowed us to tie them together as part of the flight plan. The most important rule, however, was what we used in developing a document that's called the mission rules. The mission rules provided the risk strategy for the mission, how far we are going, whether we have a problem. And these were go-no-go decisions to basically address the risk versus risk decisions and the risk versus gain decisions. Every time we had a problem, this was the Bible. And basically, this provided the first step in the resolution of the problem. Sometimes we violated mission rules because we didn't feel they predict very well. But basically, this was our contract, my contract, with the program office and the flight crew in the conduct of the mission. The Apollo 11 mission rules, which are right there, consisted of 218 pages. There are about 4,000 mission rules applied for the Apollo 11 mission. That sounds a lot, but if you break the mission down into phases, we had 12 mission phases, so you divide that number by 12, and then you divide it further by the number of time mission controllers mission control. This is the flight director's Bible and the team's Bible. 4 flight controller teams worked the Apollo 11 mission. We were all assigned to different mission phases. Cliff Charlesworth, back there, was basically the launch flight director, and he'd do the EVA. I had the lunar landing. Glenn Lenny, sitting next to Charlesworth, had the lunar ascent. Milt Wunder, sitting further behind him, had the very basic reentry. Launch. You'll talk about launch. It was at 8:32 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. It was spectacular. And the S4V was it was beautiful to watch that Space 4B drive that spacecraft up into orbit that we would then circularize, and then basically 2.5 hours later, inject the spacecraft to the moon. The trajectory coast was basically uneventful. During the following 3 days after launch, the spacecraft velocity slowly decreased to about 3,200 feet per second. Started off at around 27,000 feet per second. But now it decreased to roughly around 3,200 feet per second as it was approaching the moon's, what we call the moon's sphere of influence. And when it was taken over by the moon lunar sphere of influence, the velocity started to increase. On the 4th day, the velocity, now the spacecraft, as it passed by the moon, had increased to about roughly 8,300 feet per second. Now, if we didn't do anything, the spacecraft would go around the moon and return to Earth. But we wanted to get into the lunar orbit. So what we did is we slowed the spacecraft down by almost 3,000 feet per second, and this allowed the moon's gravity now to capture us and bring us into lunar orbit. We made another maneuver, and now we're in a lunar circular orbit at roughly 50 nautical miles. Once we got that spacecraft into lunar orbit, we basically did the housekeeping on board the spacecraft, took a quick look at all the spacecraft, and the crew entered a sleep period. Saturday, July 19th, in preparation for the landing, I'm a Catholic, I went to evening mass, and I received a blessing for our pastor. Right now, getting ready to go down to the moon, I was going to use every capability I had to give me a handle there. Mission day was Sunday, July 20th, 1969. The eastern horizon was starting to show light as I hit the road to mission control. Arriving at the control center, several controllers passed as I walked by, only today there's no conversation. They give me my privacy. The guard in the lobby offers me a hand salute as I enter the elevator. But then I changed my mind. I don't use the elevator that day. I walk up the stairs because our elevator's hydraulic. They're like automobile lifts, and they have a habit of getting stuck in the middle. Okay? 3 floors up, I walk down the narrow gray hallway to the control room. And I'm the flight director. I'm tasked to take any actions necessary for crew safety and mission success. The team now in this control room is 17 young controllers. And today, our objective is to land on the moon. The moon is traveling at 2,287 miles per hour in its orbit. It is mountainous, pelted by micrometeorites, has craters 180 miles across. Its gravity is 1/6 of Earth's gravity. It has no air, no moisture, and the temperature range is plus or minus 250 degrees. This heavenly body has never seen an earthling or felt a footstep. I got a cold, so I'm going to take a little bit of tea that my daughter right down in the front has basically made for me because I've been on the road. I've got a bad cold. But with tea, I'm go again. Entering the room, my reverie ends. The front of the room has a gray hue reflecting from the display of the spacecraft traversing the lunar surface. My white team is already in the room, intensely studying the console logs. I sit down next to Glenn Lenny. He's the flight director preceding me. He just gives me a nod. Everything's looking good, he says, all peanuts. It's been 36 hours since I've been in mission control, so I got a lot of reading. Got to read what's happened in all of the other shifts. And then I go into the spacecraft analysis room. This is SPAN. And review all of the spacecraft system discrepancies. This is where we have hot lines to the manufacturers, the North American plant and the ground plant, the testing facilities. Then I go to visit one of the most important persons in my life, which is my training supervisor. This is Dick Coos. Simulation supervisor really worked my team out, and our confidence comes from his relentless work, assuring our team is ready. Under his supervision, we learn about ruthless honesty, because when we debrief, every controller has to make a confession of what he did and why he did it, and if it was wrong, own up to it. I complete the 11th revolution and get a handover from Glenn Luddy. My white team is now briefed and ready to go. Members of 2 other teams are sitting in the ledges behind my controllers, and all I hear is a quiet murmur of voices in the room. Sitting behind me is a marvelous man. It's Robert McCall. He's the space artist. And I sort of look over his shoulder and I watch him sketch this room and the people in the room and the controls room. It's just incredible to watch this man work. I then go down to the trench, and the spacecraft on Rev 11 is now emerging from behind the moon. And we now have telemetry for the first time. It indicates the crew is entering the lunar module. Voice and data quality is excellent. With telemetry on for the first time, my 11 controllers now can see the spacecraft, and you can feel the excitement build in these guys. And it's incredible when you get the sense of this room and say, God, they're good and they're young. The Revolution 11 passed very swiftly. My flight planner, Spencer Gardner, indicates that the crew is well ahead of the flight plan. And most of the time, we're just looking over the shoulder of the crew as they activate the lunar module systems. Without being asked, my rectifier controller sets the clock to 2 hours, 47 minutes. It's now counting down to the undocking go, no go. An adjacent clock begins counting down to separation go, no go, which is 25 minutes after undocking. To get the pulse of my room, I select some communications loops, and I can listen in my backroom controllers. And they're cool as a cucumber. I mean, it's absolutely amazing. This day we're going to the moon. But they are sharp, they're on top of the job. I mean, it just really gives you the confidence, no jitters. There's no indication from them that today is any different from any of the days that we've been in mission control, training for this mission. I have absolute confidence in my team, and the room discipline is a reason. Midway through the 12th revolution, the crew has activated most of the lunar module systems, and we begin a long series of critical data and computer updates to the lunar module and service module computers. We have to send information up in case we defer the descent to the moon by 1 rev. We're going to make changes. So basically, this is all the emergency data the crew is going to need on board the spacecraft if we deviate from their flight plan. The crew has donned their helmet and gloves. The attitude control, hot fire checks and gloves are good. Initialization of the guidance system, the port guidance system and the lunar mounts primary system is activated. Approaching loss of signal, it is now time to pull my team for the go-no-go for undocking. And if all my controllers give me go, 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 go. It's almost like a training day here. Capcom passes, the undocking and docking go to the crew. The event clock is now reset. 1 hour, 10 minutes from the separation midway in Revolution 13. I am the master of the clocks. I have the responsibility, just like the quarterback on the 20-yard line, to get this mission across the goal. So basically, I control the clocks. All my decisions, you'll see that shortly, are tied into the clock. Just prior to acquisition of the signal, the spacecraft undocks, and LEM deploys the lunar module links. Collins and the command module performs a visual inspection for the LEM as it slowly rotates for inspection. Collins states, "Sure, good-looking flying machine." The mission control team now splits. We now have 2 spacecraft teams in there, one for the command service module, the other for the LEM. Splits in half. And 6 members of my team now focus exclusively in the lunar module. And these members are cross-sections of our nation. Their lives converged at this time in mission control for this day. Chuck Dietrich, on the picture there, is my retrofire officer. He's from Bloomberg, Pennsylvania. My flight dynamics officer, Jay Green, is from Brooklyn, New York. My guidance officer, Steve Bales, is from Ottumwa, Iowa. My LEM propulsion engineer, Bob Carlton, from Etowah County, Alabama. He quit high school in the 10th grade and joined the Air Force, then came back and got his education. LEM communications, power, and life support are Don Putty. He came from Ponca City, Oklahoma. My Capcom is Charlie Duke, an astronaut. He's from Charlotte, North Carolina. And I'm from Toledo, Ohio. Capcom Duke is filling up, Capcom Duke's console is filling up because all the extra astronauts are now joining to figure out what's going on. And a bunch of them button up to him at the console. I tell him, move back, get back Capcom room. We're now setting up for the decision for the descent orbit maneuver. During this pass, we continue to send many more computer data sets. State vectors, targeting for the descent orbit injection, the powered descent, contingency data in case we abort. Now the set is in spacecraft in case we wave off the descent, in the first attempt that we have to start powered descent. Total of 15 data and maneuver loads are voiced up to the crew. And basically my controllers are listening to every word that is saying, cross-checking the accuracy of that. The separation clock now reads 5 minutes and I pull my team. Again, all are go. And Duke passes the separation go to the crew. And I fumble for my cigarette pack, grasp my Zippo lighter, and just like most of the other controllers, I'm going to light up. Midway through the pass, Collins and the command service module separates from LEM. And this front side pass seems just a single continuous set of actions as the minutes count off the clock. And throughout the pass, we continue to evaluate the LEM status. And 10 minutes prior to I lost the signal, I pulled my team to give the crew the go for the descent orbit injection maneuver. And momentarily, I feel like I'm a symphony conductor getting ready for the final part of that symphony. It's strange how feelings you get. But basically, I feel that we're getting ready for some massive event. My team gives me a go. Capcom slowly and very formally passes to the crew. Eagle, you are go for descent orbit injection. Descent orbit injection maneuver is a very simple one now. It is going to establish the altitude for the start down to the moon. So basically, we're leaving the 60 nautical mile orbit and we're going down to a location 50,000 feet above the surface of the moon. It's a retrograde maneuver. It slows the spacecraft down so the moon's gravity now takes charge and brings the spacecraft down into the much lower orbit. And behind me in the viewing room, which has 74 seats, is crammed with the NASA and national political hierarchy. Members from the TV, radio, and newspapers are monitoring mission control, TV and voice, reporting from live nearby hotels. I wonder if those and the people in the viewing room are starting to feel the stress for about what we're about ready to do. 40 minutes after LEM lost the signal, with the lunar module behind the moon, it provides a relief for my controllers to go take a restroom break and have a final cigarette or have a Coke. We carefully debrief all past activities. There are no open items. Leaving the room, I can sense my team's feeling. There's no chatter, just herd movement. And I got several flight directors sitting next to me now, watching what's going on. Charlesworth lights up a cigarette, and I join up. I have my second cigarette row. Bill Tyndall, who is really a key man for planning this entire operation, he was a critical element. As a recognition of his work, I invite him to sit next to me. Blue pungent smoke of the cigarettes and the bosses behind me just fills the room. In fact, they're flowing past. It's really amazing to see the smoke circling by. Seated behind me are the great respected leaders, and I wonder where we got such great men. Dr. Guru, Chris Kraft, Sam Phillips, and George Lowe. At an adjacent console are the program directors, George Hage and Chet Lee. And this is interesting because regardless, irrespective of their seniority in NASA, at this point, they are mere observers. I have total mission authority, and with it, mission accountability. When my team returns, I direct my controllers to go to a private communications loop used only for debriefing. Only my team will hear my words. And I start, today is our day. The hopes and dreams of the entire world are with us. This is our time and our place. We will celebrate this day forever, and what we will do in the next half hour, something that's never been done before. We'll land an American on the moon. The risks are very high. That is the nature of our work. We looked long hours, and we had some tough times. But we mastered our work, and now are going to make this work pay off. You're a hell of a good team, one I am privileged to lead. And then I say, I will stand behind every decision you make. Oh. I will stand behind every decision you will make. We came to this room as a team, and we will leave as a team. I direct my controllers to return to the flight director's loop. And then I call my ground controller, go to battle short. The control room doors are locked. No one will enter or leave this room until we either landed, crashed, or abort. And I clean up my console. I remove all the clutter from the console, move the coffee cups, assistant handbooks, and rules off. My action is now focused on my log and two large time-oriented sheets, one for landing, the other in case we abort. They contain my decision criteria, go, no-go locations, key events, my decision timeline. I carried these around in a single notebook, and by the time I get ready to fly, I understand everything that's going to happen, so if anything not normal shows up, I can pick it up immediately. And this is the way my team works also. In the few remaining minutes prior to acquisition, the control room turns real quiet. Did the crew do the maneuver behind the moon? Yes. The clocks are now counting down to acquisition. What if no maneuver was performed? Another if it was performed. My retro officer sets the clock for the powered descent. It's now counting down from 18 minutes. And I think the final movement of this symphony is about to begin. My network controller announces data acquisition. Seconds later, the Capcom calls Columbia. He says, "How did it go?" Collins responds, "Everything is going swimmingly. Beautiful." T-minus 16 minutes. My communications groups come alive. All reports are now terse, shorn of useless words. AOS LEM, flight, telecom, LEM below bit rate, invert attitude. 3 reports from the controllers, just 11 words. Aldrin reports the descent orbit burn was on time. Flight dynamics officer reports X and Z residuals are now to zero. It was a perfect maneuver. My control reports the supercritical helium pressure is go. And then loud static overwhelms all communications. I can't hear anybody. I can't hear the crew. Valuable time and data is lost. 1 minute says elapsed, and we still don't have any data. Capcom calls Collins. Tell Eagle to manually reacquire. We're now working through the crewman in the command module. It works. Data's back. Without my asking, controllers report their status as go. But then the data gets ratty again. But Aldrin, we can hear him make the maneuver report. Apogee 67, perigee 9.1. Guidance gives me a go in that report. The trajectory continues are now set for the powered descent. I comment to my team. We're off to a good start. Play it cool. The lunar module voice and data is now solid. When we monitor the crew configuring the spacecraft for descent, 11 minutes to engine start, 6 minutes to the go, no go. Noise again overwhelms communication data. Precious seconds are lost and data is lost. I think stay cool. We need data for the go, no go. If I don't get enough data, I'm going to have to wave off descent to the next and the final revolution. Ratty data data continues. We're down to 9 minutes and we still don't have any data. Capcom asked Collins and Columbia to ask Eagle to try and reacquire in the high gain antenna. The Goldstone craft tracking station advises they have no downlink. I tell Telcon to try the Omnis with the low bit radar. The T-minus 9 communication data is back, and Aldrin reports he doesn't know what the problem was. But now the data is solid. We monitor the abort guidance system initialization. We report to the crew that AGS is completely, initialization complete. My flight dynamics officer calls and he says, flight trajectory data is in channel 2, and I toggle 22 at my console so I can look at the same information my trajectory officer is using. Telemetry and voice communications are now solid. Then the noise returns. Teleme and Capcom are desperately battling to restore the high data rate comm. In desperation, they select low data rates. It is decision time. It is my job to assure we have enough data so that if we crash, we will be able to establish the cause. It is my judgment alone. My thoughts at this moment, the spacecraft is in good shape. We are configured for power descent. My LEM systems look good. The crew and the team is ready. My only problem is comm. We have 5 minutes to find an answer. And then if I decide to continue on, give a go, I have an option to start the descent and abort 5 minutes into the descent. I believe comm is a pointing problem that we can solve, and I decide to commit to the descent. I pull my team. They're all go. The energy in their voices signals confidence. I say, Capcom, we're a go for power descent. Capcom says, Eagle, if you read, we're a go for power descent. Capcom advises Collins and Columbia to also pass the go to the crew. Through the noise, I can hear the Eagle's response. They're go. Their report go. Powder reports the data is back in. There are 2 computers in the LEM. The abort guidance system is back up to lunar module. It's initialized. We advise the crew. We confirm the abort guidance alignment to the primary system. During power descent, the LEM computer will sequentially execute 3 programs. One is for braking, slowing the spacecraft down so the moon's gravity pulls it to the surface. And then approach phase, where we're now setting up the conditions for the landing, and the landing phase, which is basically vertical, where Armstrong will take over and fly it manually. The braking phase reduces the orbital velocity. And during this period, the crew is oriented feet first, face down, so they can do landmark tracking. We can determine whether we're on the proper descent path. After I've given the go for ignition, I have an agonizing few minutes and pray that nothing will make me no-go the powered descent. I got a bunch of problems, but all are reported to the communications. I move the ashtrays to the right corner by the coffee cups. We give the crew a time hack, 2.5 minutes until engines start. Fido advises the trajectory is a bit low, but no problem. My comm again drops out. We call Collins of the command module to advise Eagle that he is go for PDI. Procedures calls, battle short, doors locked, all recorders are at flight speed. From now on, it's just my team and the crew. No one else exists. We're T-minus 1 minute. LEM control indicates we're in burn attitude. Engine has been armed. There's total silence in the room. No one is moving, all intensely scanning their displays for anything that would no-go the descent. Nervously, I pull my systems guys. There I go. I mentally review. There are 2 rules for engine start. If there is no auto ullage, at the start command, slip the descent 1 revolution. But if we get ullage, but no engine start, we'll have the crew manually start. It's 103 hours, 33 minutes, 4 seconds, mission elapsed time, but minus 7.5 seconds always begins. Minus 5 seconds, the computer flashes a go request to the crew, T0. Aldrin punches the proceed. The descent engine thrust is now 10%. Armstrong does not even feel the acceleration. 26 seconds later, the engine goes to 40% thrust. Descent guidance is initiated. We're now on our way down. The computer is now steering to a stored surface range condition to the landing site. LEM control reports. Engine arm, always 10%, throttle 40%, engine is go. We are committed. Sustained static again obliterates our crew voice and communications. Telemeo advises Capcom. Eagle use the Omni antennas. Noise continues just as the engine starts. The noise is so great, can't even hear my controllers. Hands over their ears. Every controller member of my team is trained to extract the crew's words from the background. Capcom and Telemeo fight to restore the comm, and they revert to the Omni antennas. 1 minute. We're now on our way down. Final reports tracking data is lost. Guidance indicates as data indicates a 20 foot per second residual error, probably due to downtrack problems. Final reports the mission control computer has dropped out. They're restarting the mission control computer. Tracking data is lost. Now data is returned. Final reports tracking systems are go. My controllers, without even my request, report their status as go. The first burst of valid telemetry indicated the radio velocity problem. Guidance advises it is holding steady. You'll watch it. I glance up at the large screen plot boards in the front of the room, and I can see the descent trajectory starting to be plotted on the track board. The LEM computer is doing the job. Capcom advises Eagle, all is looking good, mission control. A lot has happened. We're only 2 minutes into the descent, altitude 48,000 feet. We're killing orbital velocity, descending at roughly 34 foot per second. The next go-no-go is in 2 minutes. Eagle reports an AC electrical fluctuation. We advise no problem. It must be their meter. 60 seconds, the LEM will roll to a face-up attitude. As the descent continues, it will pitch over very slowly until the crew can finally see the landing site. The crew reports, and we know this, landmark tracking indicates they're going to be landing long. We confirm long. Guidance is now breathing a bit easier. The radio velocity error is now down to 18, and it's holding steady. 3 minutes into the descent, 45,000 feet, 115 miles to the landing port, coming up at the next go-no-go. Static and loud popping and crackling obliterate communications. Again, we need data for this go for several critical events coming up. Voice and data is briefly in, and then it's lost again. I advise controllers to use the last data set they had for their go-no-go. Data comes back again. I give the controllers a few more seconds to review the data to make their go-no-goes. LEM control reports the crew is now starting the road to the face-up attitude, and I pull my team to continue the descent. Retro, FIDO, guidance, control, telecom, GNC, ecom, surgeon. Their goes ring loud in the room. Guidance did not need the intercom. He yelled his go. The whole room was pumped, and in the room you can hear the snickers because Bales is just really, really going for it. There are several, we give Eagle the go to continued parties at 4 minutes. We're looking for the LEM radar data because what we need now is the true altitude. The spacecraft has been descending based on altitude data we provided from the ground. Now we need the landing in the moon. We know what the true altitude really is. Okay. Preliminary radar data, when received, has to pass, very critical, several reasonability checks before we let the computer accept it. If the radar data has not been obtained or the altitude has not converged and passed reasonability checks, the landing will be aborted at 10,000 feet. 4 minutes, 40 seconds, data and voice drops out again, 35,000 feet, descending 132 feet per second. We're 50 miles from the landing site. Guidance reminds me that we need the landing radar data by 18,000 feet or we no go. He has to make the comparison. We need the time to advise the crew to incorporate the data. I advise guidance. I copy his report. Voice loops are very silent. Then data comes back. Guidance calls. We got radar data, and it looks good. The crew confirms they got data. Delta H, the altitude difference is 2,900 feet. It's spectacular. The computer now knows the proper altitude to continue the descent. The crew reports they see theirs right out the front window. Then ask if we are looking at the Delta H. We give the crew a go, or roger. I glance briefly at the front room displays. We're now at 30,000 feet, descending about 143 per second. Guidance says Delta H is beautiful, it's converging. 5.5 minutes into the descent. Crew reports a program alarm. Seconds later, it's at 12:02. There is silence in the room for several seconds. Guidance switches from looking at the landing radar data now to address the program alarm. In a split second, I think of our final training run, clues our instructors bloodied us with making a bad decision in this very same program alarm. The approach for all you computer geeks, the approach phase is very demanding of computer resources. It runs on a 2-second cycle at about 83% CPU. Unknown to us, an interface signal from the rendezvous radar is coming in, should be, which the rendezvous radar was not in use, and it was adding another 13% CPU. So now we're at 96% CPU, and the crew calls up that program alarm. It falls down. It goes to guidance and control only. No more updating displays for the crew. The computer is faulted down. We're shedding lower priority tasks to support the guidance control function. The braking phase, which is coming up, however, is even more demanding of computer resources. The crew says, give us a reading in the 12:02. Capcom mutters 12:02, same type we had during training. Retro now calls throttle down 6+25. Guidance Officer Bales and Garmin, the NASA software guru, address the guidance control functions. They were occurring properly, and guidance gives me a go to continue the descent. Capcom passes the go to the crew. Communication reached a crescendo in the previous 60 seconds. Urgent, intense, critical. 6 minutes, 27,000 feet. Descending 132 feet per second. Guidance calls. We're going the 12:02 alarm. He repeats, go on that alarm as long as it does not continue. I ran Capcom with the throttle down time, 6+25. The servo antenna is now holding, pointing, and thank God for favors. We now got solid data. And we've had it all through the key parts of the descent, the data we need to land. We advise the crew to monitor the Descent 2 fuel gauge. The crew confirms selecting Descent 2. I mentally go through the rules for the final go, no go. From my standpoint, everything is working. I verified that the landing radar data has converged. Guidance confirms that is go. 7 minutes, 20,000 feet, coming down 150 feet per second, another max descent rate point. Aldrin suggests we may lose data on pitch over, suggests going to auto, but it looks like it's holding. We said, no, we don't want to go to auto. He then requests estimated switchover time. Capcom responds, you've got 30 seconds to program 64 of the approach phase. Armstrong reports he's tested out the manual control system is good and he switched back to auto. Control reports, crew switched back, continuing descent in auto. Commander's window now has a grid on it. Armstrong should be looking out. It's 2 panes, and there's a grid on it that if he looks at the grid indication on that window from the computer output, he can figure out where his landing site is. But he isn't doing that. He's concerned about the program alarms. He is ready to take over control of that spacecraft because he does not have an abort capability, the ejection capability there. He has to continue the descent. So Neil's concern is really, can I continue at all? 8 minutes, 10,000 feet, auto system continuing in high descent rate. The timeline had been used has kept me on track. I was on the power, I stayed ahead of the events. We've met all of our criteria to give the go for landing. And I pray that the program alarms don't continue distracting the crew. 9 minutes, without knowing it, a full minute has passed. And almost 6,000 feet altitude, we're now at 3,000 feet, reestablishing high descent rate. about 150 feet per second. Armstrong takes manual control and redesignates on the landing point designator, and then he switches back to auto. So now he's starting to work on getting the proper landing site. A few comments from Neil's debriefing related to command video sequence you're going to see very shortly. At 1,500 feet, Armstrong saw the auto system was taking him to a very large boulder field, and he has to make the decision, am I going to land short of that, or am I going to fly over it? He felt he could not land short of the crater to find a safe land in the air, and decided to move forward now very rapidly at about 30 feet per second. From here on, if there's a major problem, we're now in what we call the dead man's curve. We do not have an abort capability. We must land and then abort. At 200 feet, Neil noticed there is a transparent sheet of dust. You people in Colorado notice when you got a snowstorm and you're boiling right behind you, the dust, the snow will be driving ahead. That's Armstrong's position right now. He really can't pick up fixed landmarks. Can't know if he's moving or not. So he has to use boulders now to say, this is what I'm going to be used as my reference. Okay, we're now, the limb fuel gauge now is reading empty. How many of you have driven your car with the gauge reading empty? We now know that at 30% throttle setting, we have 120 seconds of fuel remaining. We're at that point right now. The call-outs from now on will be seconds of fuel remaining for the crew. And this one here, we're lucky we got some voice.
Position 2, all flight controllers, 20 seconds to go for landing.
Eagle, you're looking great.
Okay, all flight controllers, go for landing. Retro.
Go.
FIDO.
Go.
Guidance.
Go.
Control.
Go.
Telcom.
Go.
GNC.
Go.
ECOM.
Go.
Surgeon.
Go.
Capcom, we're go for landing.
Eagle, Houston, you're go for landing, over. Roger, understand. Go for landing. 3,000 feet. Stop alarm. 1201. 1201. Roger, 1201 alarm.
1201 alarm.
Same type, we're go, flight. We're
Okay,
go.
we're go.
Same type, we're go.
Flight settle right on. Real good. Roger.
2,000 feet. Into the ag, 47 degrees. Roger. 47 degrees.
How's our margin looking, Bob?
It looks okay. We're about 4.5.
Roger.
Eagle looking great. Your go. Roger, 1202. We copy it.
How you doing?
35 degrees. We look good here. Fine.
All right, number 2, Telcom. Go. Guidance, you happy?
Go.
FIDO.
Go. 700 feet, 21 down. 33 degrees. 100 feet down at 19. 540 feet down at 30 and at 15. Attitude hold.
Okay, at hold.
300 feet down 3.5. 47 forward. Put up. On 1.5 down. Got the shadow out there. 50 down at 2.5. 19 forward.
Okay, Bob, I'll be standing by for your call out shortly.
3.5 down. 220 feet. 13 forward. 11 forward, coming down nicely, 200 feet. 4.5 down. 5.5 down. 160 feet, 6.5 down. 5.5 down. 9 forward.
Low level? Low level.
Good. 120 feet. 100 feet, 3.5 down. 9 forward. 5%. 185. Okay, 75 feet. There's looking good. Down a half.
60. Roger.
6 forward.
60. 60 seconds.
60 seconds. Lights on. 40 feet down, 2.5. Picking up some dust. 30 feet, 2.5 down. Great shadow.
Stand
4 forward. At 4 forward, just into the right a little.
30. 30 seconds.
30 seconds. Forward, just. Contact light. Okay, engine stop. Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
I record the landing time in my log. 3:17:39 Central Daylight. And I let out my breath. I don't know how long I'd been holding it. Then I hear a noise I'd never expected, never experienced in training, because the viewing room with all the high policymakers sitting behind me starts erupting in cheers. They're cheering, they're stomping their feet. They're clapping. Program managers and PL headquarters and those people behind me are all reserved, but you can still hear them shuffling around. And I get angry and say, okay, all flight controllers, settle down. 45 seconds to T1, stay, no stay. Because now what we must do is we must go through a series of stay, no stay decisions. Is the spacecraft safe for the crew to remain on the surface? We do it at 2 minutes, we do it at 8 minutes, and 2 hours. So we're tied, while everybody's celebrating, we are tied to this control room. My voice croaks with pride as I call for the T1 stay, no stay. And Retto stay, FIDO stay, guidance stay, control stay, telemuse stay, surgeon stay. Capcom, we are stay for T1. Duke advises Eagle, you are stay for T1. And Armstrong responds, Roger, we're pretty busy here. We monitored the lunar module for 2 hours, then initiated the power down. And they give the crew the time 3 stay and hand it over to the EVA team. 6.5 hours later, Neil Armstrong took his first step on the moon. And with my team's job done, we're now the observers. We see Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin deployed the American flag to the lunar surface. We had finally fulfilled our pledge that we made to our dead president, John F. Kennedy, and the crew of Apollo 1, Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee. 3.5 hours later, in fact, 3.5 days later, as the crew boarded the carrier, it's time to celebrate. And we hand over responsibility for this mission to the Recovery Task Force commander. With cigars and flags, we celebrate our mission. And I close this talk tonight with President Teddy Kennedy's words. We knew the triumph of high achievement, and we failed, at least we failed by daring greatly. So our place will never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. They're going to give me a few minutes for questions there. And I think we've got some roving microphones. But frankly, the film that you saw earlier, we restored mission control to the condition it was in, and in the process of restoration, we found 16mm film that had never been shown before. And that basically is, I used the same talk up at the Smithsonian in November. And I assembled 12 minutes out of that film that we got into the sequence I used, and then I tied together the cruise debriefing, my log, the air-ground transcript, and basically wanted to tell the full story of the lunar landing. Most of the places you see now only get it after we solved all the problems and we're ready to land, so we get into the final 3 minutes. So this was a real privilege to tell the story of my teams, because the teams were spectacular. It was not only the members of the teams, it was all the support teams. It was my training team. The people in the back row, I thought, these are the people who have the total responsibility for the program, but they give it to me for this day. And they let us exercise it. This, you give people responsibility, you let them do that. That was, it was just a marvelous time to live. This was a great time. And our teams, we will be having our celebration back in Houston, July 21st, mainly because we knew headquarters would mess up July 20th. Okay? So we got a very private party that we have every year. And this year here, it's an enormous party. We got almost 800 people going to coming. Most of my teams have already passed on. They're in the Great Mission Control Center up. 3 of the people that were on this team for landing are now deceased. And it's really tough to talk at times and see them. But go ahead. Any questions? Oh, I got a couple of hands up. Ladies first. Oh, you missed one over here. Okay.
Hi. Hello. First of all, thank you so much for coming. I really enjoyed your presentation. Later this week, I have the opportunity of traveling to Houston to interview for a flight controller position. And I was just wondering what kind of advice you have if I were to get this position.
Fantastic. Wow. You're a hero. You know, it's interesting. I had, throughout my entire life, I've spent mission control. I wasn't a program manager. I loved operations. I loved flying. I loved flight testing, basically in mission control. My life is doing things, making things happen. And I got to respect in mission control, when young people just like you come in, we have a document we call the Foundations. And this is a listing of the lessons learned throughout the early space program. And there are the qualities we feel are essential to excellence. But there's one that always gets the new young people coming in. And it says to always be aware that suddenly and unexpectedly you may find yourselves in a role where your performance has ultimate consequences. You know, mission control is no shades of gray. It's black or white, go or no go, stay or no stay. And many of the young people we get in there always feel there's going to be somebody buffering them. But that isn't the way we operate. We have seconds to make decisions. So I congratulate you on your decision here. Good luck.
On the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11, there are currently plans in action to return to the moon by 2024. What do you see as the importance of returning, and what do you hope is achieved, expanding on Apollo's achievements?
I think it's a good move, because I think it's time that we stop looking to the past and start looking to the future. I believe the greatest challenge, however, is to build the team. I believe it's going to be easier to build the rocket than the spacecraft, which are well along. But build people capable, and there's large numbers of them, of serious quality risk management. You know, we lost so many of the risk managers. This is something that doesn't come out of books. You can't take college courses in it. You can't do it online. It comes through personal experience. And to get it through development of such things as mission roles, intensive debates with program managers and which one's the right way to go. Training supervisors, there's nothing beautiful about them. They're ugly. I mean, they really work you out. But that's the way it has to be. And that is why mission control stands for excellence. It always has. But basically, I think that the challenge is building the team. And then there's a secondary one which is equally excellent, equally important. It's starting to develop unity, because we cannot keep moving forward in the country until we can learn to work together. And that's politically, technically, economically, right on down the line. So we must become one nation again. And final thing is, where are we going to find the leadership? Because as I said, we had the titans of leadership there. And the times when we were hurting for management and running a program, we would get vice presidents of the major companies come down and teach us how to manage a program. We had John Yardley come in from McDonald. I worked with John at McDonald. He'd come in and he'd run a program for us. He'd teach us how to manage, how to conduct reviews and all this kind of stuff. George Jeffs, we had wondrous array of people that could come in and would come in and help us. And I don't know if our industry has got that depth anymore that they can afford to move some of these qualified people here. So if America wants to compete in the future, they have to. I think stepping up to a lunar program might be the best thing in developing the leadership we need for the future. I got a hand right here. Must be Miller time. I don't see many hands in here.
Oh, so, Mr. Kranz?
Oops, go ahead.
I was wondering that, so if we do a Mars mission, how do you feel mission control would have to adapt to things like the communications delay and other similar problems?
I think what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to put a mission control capability in today with today's expert systems and all that kind of stuff. You know, at one time we used to have basically a flight engineer on board most aircraft transports, that kind of stuff. I think you're going to need a flight engineer type guy as part of the crew who basically has the knowledge and has the access to the communication to work with people and problems. But basically, it's going to have to be a short-term answer to the problems. It's going to have to come on board the spacecraft. You can't wait for the ground to get involved. The moon's a different situation. I believe that before we go to Mars, we got to learn to live for space an extended period of time. I was a camper. Our family camped, and it's amazing how many times you go out and brought the wrong things. And you take it back and wonder why you didn't bring this. So it takes you 2 or 3 trips before you really recognize how to go camping. And I think that's the situation we're going to find when we go to the moon. The only time we've been to the moon is for relatively short stays, 2 or 3 days. And basically, we got to the moon first. Go ahead. Oh, here we go. One more question. I got to haul out of here. Basically, I got a speech. Tomorrow I got to get a haircut, and then I go to Purdue. And then I go to Purdue. My hair's too long. They might mistake me. Go ahead. One more. Who's the lucky one? Go ahead.
I was wondering, as someone who's so well known as both a leader and a team builder, what would you say one of the most important lessons you've learned in that role as someone who promoted such unity and teamwork?
That's a interesting question, because the leader must be respected by the people he is leading. Must have no questions about his not only ability, but about his personality. What is the value system he lives by, etc. And that leader must have the ability to form trust in a small group of people who will become sub-leaders. And from then, where you're going to establish a common value system, and then after that, you're going to start building your team. That's why it takes time. I worked for marvelous leaders throughout my entire career, both in the Air Force, actually back when I was going through college. But basically in the Air Force career, and then the end-of-flight test, and then into the early space program. And basically there wasn't one individual in that guy that I wouldn't die for. He was that good. And I think that's the kind of leadership we got to find it for us. But it starts off with a core leader who builds a small team, establishes the trust. They establish a set of values. I talked about if you go online, you can find the 2 things. One document called The Foundations of Mission Control. After the Apollo 1 fire, we sat down and wrote out those qualities that we must possess if we are to be true steely-eyed missile men and capable of managing the risk of the program. The other one that's on there is one that was after the Apollo 1 fire. It's called the Krantz Dictum, because when we lost the crew, I could have called a halt. No more testing today. Things aren't right. The launch team could have done that. The crew could have done it. The fact is, nobody stood up and said, let's scrub. Let's come back and find a better day there. So basically, you got to find leadership that is willing to be unique and have a clear statement as to what they stand for, and he has to build the team in that same fashion. That's it. Thank you.